pressed that right at the start, but we'll catch it now. So moving on next to Joao. So we have Joao Diaz with AAC International. Would you like to give a quick intro?
Yeah, definitely. Hi, everyone. Speaking from Stuttgart today. I've been living in the UK actually until very recent. Yeah, I'm a civil engineer by degree. Now completing my second master's in data science. I've been working as a planning and scheduler, or a planner and scheduler over the last 15 years. And obviously, weather risk, it's an important component of it and the day-to-day job, not only for the as-planned component, but also the as-built. How do we treat the data? And therefore, I met EHAB in a couple of projects where I've been as well trialing it out. And it is obviously providing obviously a great support, and at the same time, as being a topic that I have been exploring in the last couple of years, also supported by AAC recommended practices and all the papers, peer-reviewed papers that are published on the virtual library, have obviously been part of the day-to-day job delivery. So yeah, excited to be here and listening to you, but also sharing some thoughts. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Joao. And then last but definitely not least, Julieta Moradei with Overlay Capital. Feel free to unmute and please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Erin. Excited to be here and excited for the conversations. I'm now based in Los Angeles, California, typically based between New York and Miami. Can answer a lot of questions there. From Argentina, grew up in Montreal, saw a Montreal person in the chat. I'm a managing partner at Overlay Capital, specifically the Build Fund, which is focused on construction technology to decarbonize our built world. And we focus on both investing in all stages of startups as well as private equity. But on top of that, we're doing consulting on the adoption of technology to owners of real estate. So basically able to bring our portfolio companies to these owners and external startups as well to see, how we could actually engage into the adoption barrier in the construction industry.
Amazing. So quite the variety of backgrounds, and I'm definitely excited to really get into the discussion today. So before we get into it, just a couple quick housekeeping things. You'll see that it's just the speakers today that we have our cameras on. And then in terms of questions, feel free to drop your questions into the chat. We'll have time at the end to address them. And we'll also have some time, if the group doesn't get too big, we'll see if we can have people unmute and actually participate in some of the discussions. So as we go through this first section of discussion, feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and then we'll grab them at the end. And then the other piece of housekeeping today, so Alex, you have a nice little poll for us to keep us engaged. So if you don't mind sharing that link in the chat so everybody can access it, that'd be fantastic. So for our attendees, it will be a link to what's called a Mentimeter. It's really simple to join. Either click the link or type in the code, and it will let you engage with some of the polls and questions that we have here for today. So, we're not just having a conversation with ourselves, but we want to hear from you as well. So the link is in the chat. Feel free to go ahead and click that to get access. And if there are any issues with that, just let us know and we'll find another way to share. So kicking us off, the first theme that we're going to dive into today, it's about risk in construction, which is pretty much the day in and day out of what we do as project managers in the field, builders, building buildings. We have to control risk in construction. So for our speakers today, which ones are the most and least understood? So feel free to share, what are your insights on the most common risks in construction? And then we'll get into a part 2 about how technology can help that. So Alex, I see you unmuted. How about we start with you?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. So I think that one of the risks I would like to talk about today is weather risks. So some people may not be aware of that, but about 45% of projects are now impacted by weather. So this is really, really problematic. And the cost of weather is estimated to be around more than 3 trillion by 2030. So it's definitely a very high risk in the industry. And yeah, happy to explore any other risk or to keep the discussion about this one if you guys want. Yeah.
Was that 45%?
Yeah.
Did I hear that right? Wow. Yeah. So it falls right in line with my experiences here in LA this year. Like we literally had hurricane trending at some point just because of like the crazy weather effects going on. So I have definitely seen that tangibly in my experience. So Joao, do you have any input on that as well?
Yeah, I think there is, in my view, no right or wrong answer to your question around the risks. I think it also obviously the weather and the climate is a big one, but it also depends where you are, right? If you are probably in a tropical middle of the jungle trying to build a road, your risk profile is different depending on the scope that you are executing. So yeah, in my perspective, once again, weather and climate is super important. Somehow, and what I've seen is usually the contractors, they tend to at least evaluate the weather risk in the beginning, but still through a manual process. And that leads to potentially the highest risk that some of the authors in the risk and mega projects recently have published, which is the risk of the project manager or the person that is actually trying to evaluate the risks. So I think there probably it's where the highest risk in the end of the day is. It's about the project manager perspective. That might be right or wrong, and therefore it brings an additional risk to and probably the highest risk of if you compare with obviously the different risk types that you have.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. Juliet, I see you unmuted as
Yeah,
well.
I'd also love to just ask a question, Joao, on that. The project manager risk, I'd love if you could elaborate that more specifically. Is it depending on who is project managing and how much they care about climate, and that's going to affect the project?
And all the assumptions that you as a human being will make. Assuming, for example, that the project will go as planned and perhaps not seeing the different or that layer that is beyond the risk register, beyond that just external and internal risks. For example, do you have, the skilled people with you that will help you to deliver the project? Are you actually envisage and collecting once again the right risks depending on the scope? But there are a couple of authors that are actually bringing that perspective that the highest risk in a project is actually the project manager and obviously the team that actually is executing.
I'd love if you share some of those links in the chat here for some of those authors. I completely agree. A lot of this stuff, there's so many different certifications when it comes to climate prevention and risk that there's not one source of truth. And so it's really dependent on the human error. So it's a super interesting point. I could share an anecdote on a project on how we're handling kind of climate risk. So I'm working on an ocean project, and obviously the ocean temperature is increasing wildly every single year. And so as designers, architects, engineers, we have to really think about the design for what the water temperature is going to be in 2050. And it's not just the design of the structures, the construction, but it's the design of the ecosystem. And so the ecosystem being the marine life and the corals and how that's going to be affected, which ones are going to survive this, and kind of through natural selection, what are the corals and animals that are surviving in these hotter temperatures? And so I've seen it actually as something that it's very much at the front of everyone's mind, because we know that for the project to survive a 50-year lifespan for most buildings, you need to design in accordance to that. And so I feel like this in the past 2-3 years, we've talked more about climate change and the risks of it and the changes of it for the project parameters more than I've ever heard before. And so I think it's also a really exciting opportunity to tap into that. And so for the anecdote of this project, while I can't share specifics about it, I could share that the main person out of the 150-person team for the architects, engineers, and contractors is the scientist. And so for the first time I've ever seen in my background in design and engineering, the marine biologist is the one that has the loudest voice in the room, and everyone's listening to them, because we have to listen to what the repercussions are of not just our climate changing and how the ocean is going to affect our design, but how our buildings are going to affect the ocean, right? So anything that we put into Mother Nature is going to affect the ecosystem around it. And so it's kind of this, we have to understand both sides. But I think we're just having more interesting conversations than we've ever had before around climate.
Wow. Yeah. Just the fact that there's this role of biologist, microbiologist, you said, on the team, on the construction team. Is that right? Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Exactly.
Wow. Yeah. I've never heard of that before. So that's, I think, a positive thing. We're starting to listen and kind of pick up that, hey, this thing's probably kind of important in construction, because we want to, have a certain longevity to our projects and like the work that we're doing and where we live, right? So thanks for sharing that, Julieta. That's really interesting to hear. So part 2 of this question as well. So what's technology's role with basically managing this weather risk? I think a lot of times when we think about weather, it's, an unforeseen event or something that we say, okay, well, we can't control the weather. What do we do here? So how does technology come into play? And I'll first start with Alex with EHAB. So from your perspective, what can we do as just humans against the weather?
Thank you so much. So I guess that one of the biggest risks that we can face are the risks that we are not anticipating. So having a data-driven approach is one of the top things that we can do. And actually the model that we have built now is 94% accurate. So it's very useful at different stages of the construction phase, for example. So when you're bidding as a contractor, if you're using a tool like ours or many other tools, you can really put an accurate amount of time risk allowance in your bid. And the client can also assess an appropriate amount to put in the bid. So that's really, really useful. And you can also compare different plans and make variations so that you can really mitigate those risks and make a decision early on. So that's something that's really useful, I think, on those projects.
So you threw out a couple of things like a data approach, and a few of the metrics that are helpful to track. Do you want to expand a little bit more on like what that data informed approach really means? Like why should we care about data as builders?
So I think that data is really, really important because there are different climate shocks that are happening at the moment, and there are different regions and weather events that are going to impact those projects. So it's important to know that it's possible to quantify the impact of temperature, wind, rain. We mentioned like the ocean, like wave height, lightning, storms. So using a model like this can really help you like anticipate those risks. And if you can also incorporate your plan onto a platform like ours, you'll be able to see all of your key activities that are impacted by weather. And so you can make changes that are relevant to you. And with data, what is also great is that you can also integrate your plan and the workflow and have all of like this very collaborative approach, because you can share your data, so you can print it using during the risk meetings. And so this really enables more collaboration and also to be more ready for addressing those extreme weather events.
Got it. So basically helps us be able to be more preventative instead of reactive on the job site. Amazing. Yeah. So I'm going to pick on maybe Julieta from your construction tech background and having been in the context space for a while. So what do you see technology's role being with climate, with weather, with the building industry in general?
It's one of my favorite questions because I started becoming interested in resiliency for climate. I mean, probably back in 2010, I started doing research during my entire undergraduate around design for deconstruction and graduate school as well. Meaning after the lifespan of the building, how can you reuse all the same materials? Because about 98% of the steel and concrete is not recycled. And the built environment is responsible for 40% of carbon emission. We're the most responsible industry and the least digitized. And so we're not really advancing decarbonizing the built environment. So what I'm really interested now, since probably 2017, 2018, when there's been a rise of construction technology, we've seen now a rise of venture capital funds that are just investing in construction tech. And then probably in the last 2 to 3 years, a lot more people investing in climate tech specifically, is the intersection of climate tech and construction tech, that beautiful intersection where people are saying, oh, the construction industry and the built environment's responsible for 40% of carbon emission. So there's a lot of technology and opportunity to bring in here, a lot of financial ROI, but a lot of impact ROI. And so that marriage to me is truly that double bottom line approach of both, financial returns and impact returns. So what I've seen in terms of, construction technologies that are at that intersection are, divided up into 3 categories: software, hardware, and material science. I think material science is where we need more patient capital, meaning some of those VC returns are not as quick, but where we really need to infuse a lot of.
Oh, I'm going to. Apologies for that.
I think we want to jump in. Maybe Eloy, put your question in the chat and we could talk about it later.
There's some background noise. Continue.
The material side, I think that's where we have actually the biggest impact potential. It's just more difficult to get VCs on board because the returns are not as quick. And so that's why it's really fascinating to see funds like Breakthrough Energy that started their Catalyst model in order to have more patient capital, bring private-public partnerships for funding. And I think materials are where, 8% of carbon emissions is just cement. And so there's all these technologies that we've seen for years now that are carbon neutral or carbon positive. And so I'm starting to see more interest in this space on the investor side, because I'm coming at it from the investor side now. And I think that's what's going to really catalyze a lot of these technologies. And then on the policy side, new regulations that are increasing the adoption rate. And that's what we really need. And then on the software and hardware side, there's just a lot of technologies around how do we actually measure carbon? How can we start measuring decarbonization along the entire value chain? And then hardware, 3D printing, for example, it allows zero waste for cement. Or we could actually start getting more interesting with the kinds of cement that we're putting into the 3D printer. So all around, I'm just very excited. I think, while we could talk about climate change as a super negative thing, which it is, I think there's a lot of room for opportunity in the built environment specifically.
Yeah, I think the insight that I picked up from that is climate tech is construction tech. They should be one and the same because it's going to be essential to our core business operations.
Completely agree. Really quick for everyone who's interested in that, what Erin just said, construction tech is climate tech. Bill Gates wrote a book about how to avoid a climate disaster. It's basically a framework for how do we even solve this massive problem. And in chapter 1, he basically says the built environment is the #1 thing we need to tackle. So anyone that's interested in this, go read it. It's urgent and we need to have more people on board with it.
And I'm dropping a link into the chat. I think it's the first one that popped up, so don't blame me if it's not quite right, but how to avoid a climate disaster. Thanks, Julieta. All right, so I do want to move on to our poll. So Alex, if you don't mind sharing the screen with the Mentimeter. And for anyone who might have joined late, I'll drop the link to the poll in the chat as well. And it should show up on the screen. So, yep, it just looks like it's not in full screen. That's all, Alex.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Here we go.
Beautiful. Awesome. So we do have some data coming in. I'm taking just a moment to read through here. So we asked, what percentage of your projects would you consider to be impacted by unpredictable weather? And I see a couple more responses coming in, but so far nobody has chosen the none option, which I think is extremely telling for what we deal with in construction in this industry, especially when it comes to dealing with climate effects and just natural weather that happens in our different regions. I am also noting the really big jump, or I guess the highest is the 75 to 100%. So looks like it's skewed towards that high range as well. Great. All right. So you can feel free to stop sharing, Alex. That's fine.
Thanks.
We can maybe reshare at the next one. But yeah, so we'll continue to do a couple polls. I think there may be 2 more to go. So thank you all for sharing and participating in that poll. Awesome. So now let's move on to the next theme. Like we talked about, or Alex, you touched briefly on like the collaboration component. There's a lot of communication that needs to happen in construction to keep our projects moving. Like we just saw, most of us, 75 to 100% of our projects are experiencing adverse effects from weather. So we need to communicate and manage that together as a team. So I'm going to maybe pick on Joao here to start from your planning background. So what roles do planners and superintendents, because those are pretty much our 2 key components that are kind of managing the schedule and organizing work in the fields. So what roles do like the planners and superintendents play with communicating and managing the risks that are affecting 75 to 100% of our projects?
Yeah, I mean, definitely it's a key role, right? I think starting and focusing on the weather and climate, I think the planner and the cost estimator as a key function while you are still at the design stage or at tender stage, planning stage. Obviously, depending on where your project is located, you as a key one of the key functions is obviously studying the weather, understanding the weather, and bring that component into your time schedule, into your cost. And it's not just, counting the weather days. It's also, you need to understand the different type of scopes to allow, for example, time for weather preparation day, or even actually the weather event. You also need to wait for example, if you are doing earthworks, you need to wait for the soil to dry in order for you to proceed. So there are it's a complex study, and therefore you do need to be on top of the game. You really need to understand how to manage that, again, tender and pre-con. And then as you move forward during execution, your function is key from the planning perspective. And actually, this is where digital and technology is adding a great value, is you have your planned activities, and for sure the digital and technology can start actually warning you that you are planning to execute and to install a facade during a wind season, or a wind day, or a wind week, and therefore you need to take actions in order to reshape your sequence. And the same for earthworks, where technology can tell you already you actually are planning to execute earthworks on a rainy week or rainy day, and therefore you can take action to manage that, proactive action, obviously. And in case, obviously, you need to understand, in case you want to build up an extension of time claim, is also obviously important to analyze retrospectively your actual data, what really happened, and use that to start benchmarking and building your trends as well. For large mega projects, definitely you need to evaluate that. And that will help you, again, to take the decision on how to sequence your works. Perhaps you will bring all the earthworks to the dry season and move some other works to the rainy season, and vice versa. So it's really important that you get that information, that insights accurately, and you manage that upfront and as you deliver. So that's a super important role, and it cannot be avoided, to be honest. Unfortunately, not all the contractors, not all the subcontractors, stakeholders understand the function and the need. But when you are playing the game and when you are on site, when you see the reality, you start actually to understand the importance of managing those risks ahead as best as you can. Obviously,
Right.
technology is adding a great value there for sure.
I love how you bring up that it's all going back to that data piece, right? And the central role is you make a plan and you follow the plan, but it doesn't always go according to plan, right? So with
Exactly.
more tools and the data behind it, as you're mentioning, the insight that I'm taking from this is like we can essentially adjust that plan and basically have a much better historical look at what's happened to help us predict and then control for project outcomes. Alex and Julieta, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Thanks. I think that's really interesting. And actually at EHAB, we're super passionate about climate resilience. So we conducted some research and we had more than 200 answers on one of our surveys globally. And one thing that stood out is that most people do integrate weather data into their planning, but they don't model weather data. So what they would do is that they would look at like BBC weather apps or like the Met Office, for example, but they would actually be modeling weather. However, in the question of the use of new technology and how it can help solve the cost, damages, and delays caused by weather, 71% of respondents say yes. So people are changing their perspectives on how to address weather risks. So that's really promising for the future. Yeah, so that's something I wanted to add. And especially in terms of like also health and safety, that's pretty scary. So one of the questions we asked was, do they expect to see a rise in health and safety incidents from extreme weather events on sites in the next 3 to 5 years? And 63% of respondents said yes. So I think that, yeah, it's a very scary and alarming subject. So it's important that people take this into account and have more conversations to drive change in the industry.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead, Julieta, with your comment.
Oh, my comment was more around just what you were saying, Erin, around data. I think the second that there's data in front of you, people can't object it. I think it's our one source of truth. We were talking about before about how it's actually all dependent on this project manager and their intentions in whatever project they're handling and their assumptions and the human error. But the second you smack data on it, that's to a high degree of accuracy, like what EHAB is providing, then I think that's where there's one source of truth. And so I think as we move forward in any kind of design and planning project, it's really starting off with that data first. Or, in our example, having a scientist on board as well that's saying, these are the do's and don'ts of the project, so that architects and engineers, from, my experience, they love parameters and constraints. They love to have the whole set of parameters and then what's the final outcome that we want. And then they're going to run and make it happen. But I think as part of that parameter setting that we're so used to in the built environment, which is so many different disciplines, there needs to be a scientific and data-driven parameter set as well.
Right. I think the phrase has been out there a little bit, but like data is the new oil, essentially. So it's basically driving, lubricating, making things go a lot more seamlessly, to the point earlier, like, yeah, you can't argue it once it's there. So it definitely helps things flow much better, I think, especially in terms of communication and then getting stakeholders to agree on like key policy changes too that help improve project outcomes. All right, so I'm gonna jump a little bit around here. So Alex, if you're able to, I'd love to get the other questions going on the poll. So I think we have 2 more. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. So I'll share my screen now. Sorry.
Yeah. So the next question that we'll ask the audience, and if you're unable to participate in the poll, feel free to answer in the chat. So please add comments, questions into the chat. We'll get to an open discussion section in just a few minutes here. But how much has extreme weather affected your construction projects? So what were steps that you took to mitigate the impacts? And no worries, Alex, take your time on the Mentimeter. Okay. So I see, so the question that I see is, what percentage of your projects have been impacted by extreme weather this year? Please share any steps you took, which it might be similar to the last one, but there is another question on there, right? Right, Alex?
Yes.
Oh, here we go. Beautiful. All right. So what innovations would you like to see in construction technology to improve climate resilience? So would love to hear from the audience. Feel free to either use the Mentimeter or type your comment into the chat. And then I'll also ask that, back to our panelists. I mean, I'll share a little bit too from my own personal experience. Like on one of my first projects, we had, I wouldn't say extreme rain event because it doesn't often happen here in LA, but we did have a significant rain where we did have to shut down. Things got all sorts of washed out. It was a mild disaster for a couple days. And especially in construction, just those couple of days cost you so much. And then it became kind of a back and forth with the client. Well, how many rain delays are typical for a year in Southern California? And we had to do a whole bunch of research, kind of scrambling and going back to, well, what does the National Weather Service say for historical rainfall events in Los Angeles? And all this other stuff to show like, no, this is actually somewhat within the range of normal. And we did budget for certain days, but it was basically this whole big deal of like, hey, we lost, a couple of days on the schedule, but it's like, well, what else do you want us to do? So it would have been great to have some sort of a crystal ball or access to that reporting data. I think to your point, Joao, in the pre-construction phase where we're talking about scheduling and planning to bake in a more accurate number of rain delays. So that's something that I specifically had thought of that, I would have wanted if I could like wave a magic wand and create a tool. That would be one of them. Any other thoughts? I see you nodding your head, Julieta.
No, I love when you bring people together to just do kind of like a request for innovation. I don't like saying RFI because in construction we think about something else, but
Nice.
Because a lot of times when we say like, I wish I could, magic wand and have the solution, there are those solutions out there. So I've always thought about if there'd be like a competition of some sorts where we could throw out ideas of what we're seeing on sites on like the contractor perspective or planning perspective, and then hearing back from startups that already exist potentially. If I could wave a magic wand, I would love to have an overlaid approach to from the moment you start conceptual schematic design through the entire construction documentation, so the entire design process, through construction and through operations, something that collects data and all the inputs and what changes those inputs along those cycles. What I mean by that is construction is so siloed. We have so many different disciplines. I think it's one of the most complex industries because we have so many stakeholders. So if there's something that could aggregate data from every single stakeholder, whether it's on the design perspective for cost and time, specific design constraints, but then also the carbon emission side, which I think is really hard to track, that is overlaid in the entire model. So if we're using, something like Revit, and then through that digital twin later on, if there's something that really overlays all of those design inputs and then construction inputs and then the delivery and operations. I haven't seen something that's seamless along the entire construction value chain, but I think it's the only way that we could really have, data be oil, like you were saying, Erin.
Yeah.
Needs to be continuous because from design to construction, there's this very big breaking point where we have a different model where things are moved from Revit to then the shop drawings and just data's lost. So if anyone knows of anything out there, please let me know.
All right. So let's see. Any other thoughts, Alex and Joao?
No, I'm pretty much in line with what Julieta just mentioned. I think that should be the target. But I truly believe we are far from it. Even though the things are evolving, and I can tell you that back in 2008, 2009, I needed actually to call the meteorological centers in Africa to request for them to send me the data,
Wow.
either via post or via email when I was tendering to projects
Yeah.
in Africa. From now till nowadays, or from there till nowadays, the things have definitely evolved. And you have these tools like EHAB that can definitely bring you the live data source into your table. But yeah, there are plenty of things to be done. I think the digital twin world will definitely be key here, and all the virtual reality as well. But in the end of the day, you will need to go still deeper into the detail of the data. So every single equipment, every single labor, every single material will need to aggregate value, needs to have a component that you can transform in KPI in order to obviously add value to your assessments. But yeah, I think we are still far from it, even though digital technology is perhaps already a step ahead and going ahead. I think now you need to give a step back and think on how to structure storage and manage your data.
Yeah.
I think that's missing, and it's actually once again going back to academic papers. If you do a review of AI in construction, every single academic paper tends to agree and argue that data structure is the problem. You don't have any data structure, so how can you actually use AI or use the digital capacity in order to generate value? So yeah, I think we are in the right path, but still far from ideal. Yeah.
Gotcha. And I would agree. We're definitely on the right path, especially with new tech solutions. So I'm going to wrap up our panelist piece of this conversation and then get to Q&A in just a moment. But the last question that, I want to pick on Alex for, so what innovations, we're saying we're basically on the right track here, and EHAB is a big part of that. So what innovations are you doing at EHAB to basically enhance the whole process with climate, managing weather, reducing risk, having us have more predictable planning?
Thanks. So actually, if you can still see my screen on like the answers and like what innovations would people...
It's not sharing if you want to try to reshare.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, I was looking at the different answers in the different sorry. Or maybe I can just talk about the different answers that were brought up, but people mentioned that they want proactive weather engines and they want like notification specific actions. And I think one of the key innovations that we have is that we can provide weather forecasts and like a percentage of confidence that a plan will finish on time years in advance, but also early warnings. So for example, for short-term planning, we give the data that we have accessible to any project manager because we have this free tool for short-term planning. And that's really, really useful to use on the day-to-day and to be proactive. Also like, and so, in terms of innovation, we really built our model based on the use cases that we had. We have those different mitigation scenarios, and we really enable to use to understand and also manage risks in a very analytical way, but it's also in a very digestible and easy way as well, because you can receive like those early warnings, those emails that would summarize the key actions that you have to take. And I think it's also an industry where people are very busy and don't really have the time to model weather and to understand those unpredictable weather events. So we really make this data accessible and digestible.
Yeah, that I completely relate to. Nobody has the time to check the weather. It's why so many teams just look at a very quick forecast. Oh, it's sunny. All right, let's go for the day. And they don't really think too much ahead. So that's fantastic. So thanks for sharing. And at this point, I'm going to switch over to some of the questions that are popping into the chat. So the first one that we have here, are any of the panelists experienced with using digital twin technology as a way to reduce risk on projects?
Well, myself as a planning engineer, being on site for quite some time, I will not go as far as digital twin, but definitely we have been using the time and the 3D model together, so-called 4D planning, in order to in order to reduce the risk by, obviously, together with the different trades, try to identify, for example, trade clashes, any sort of clashes on the execution ahead of the time, obviously, and using that to reduce risk.
Thanks, Joe. And Julieta, I think you unmuted as well.
Yeah, I mean, I love this question because the answer is yes. Like, if we had a true digital twin, back to my, if I could, wave a magic wand, then that would help us, especially if it's a as built digital twin as well. It's not just as designed, meaning every single component that actually went into that building, we have a material passport for. We know how long it's maintained for, all the information around the carbon. It would be ideal to reduce risk because, of course, we have more data in order to actually know what to do if we have a climate effect to that component, that specific component, or to the entire structure. The reality is that it is right now, it is very difficult and very expensive to have a true digital twin in our industries. And so until we get to the point where we are capable on a technology perspective and price perspective for all disciplines to work in one digital twin that has all that accurate information, I think we need to have an MVP. I think we need to have other solutions. And I'm really interested, Joao, to hear from your perspective, kind of what that MVP looks like for you. Because a lot of people, especially on the tech side, will throw out, like, why don't you just have a digital twin? A lot of clients will throw that out. You should have a digital twin of the entire environment as well. The forest around your building. And it actually takes a lot of computation, a lot of time. It's very expensive. So what's the minimum viable product that we could use today to have as much information as possible to make more informed decisions, to kind of not wait until we have the perfect product, which would be this ideal digital twin years from now.
Thanks. I'm digesting all of that. So very insightful response there. So I'll move on to the next question. I think we have quite a few popping in here. So Josh is asking, this is for you, Joao. So back to the conversation of we're kind of far from having a lot of really good solutions that are truly solving this problem. So what are the key barriers to that?
No, that's a great question, and I have been actually I think doing a couple of conferences and speeches around this topic. And in my perspective is related to the qualitative components that are missing from contracts. An example is, you have your drawings, you have your quantities, you as a client, I mean, public infrastructure owner, you want to build a road, but you ask for the road, right? You are not actually asking and detailing how do you want to manage the construction project. Do you want to do it just in an Excel spreadsheet? Do you want to do it in Post-its and in the white wall? How do you want to execute and to manage the qualitative data, cost and time? How do you want to execute that? So part of that needs to be detailed in the contracts. And in my view, that will be, I think the game changer is when clients, owners start to realize, actually, I need, for example, the weather data for my overall portfolio. So let me request it already for this particular project, the road that I'm building in France, for example. So let me start requesting that now. And therefore, the contractor will be starting pricing, will search for the right solution, for the right technology, and deploy and adopt that. So if the owner and developer does not the requirement in the contract upfront,
Yep.
the construction industry is not ready, in my view, to take a step forward and have their own R&D departments, right? There is no such thing,
Absolutely.
in my view. There are very small niche group of companies that take the initiative to have their own R&D department, but you can probably put and count them with your right hand, right? So that's a responsibility, in my view, of private owners, public owners, to start writing the contracts in a way that help and demand the construction industry to evolve.
Yeah,
While
I
we
think
don't have that, it will be always personal agendas, in my view.
that is a hot topic I've seen come up, and not just in the like climate risk mitigation space, but like all over construction tech, because there's so many teams and builders out there that want to be really innovative, use great tools, but it's so hard, especially with margins, to justify doing that R&D without a
Exactly.
client basically saying, I care about this, you have to do this because I care about it. So I think what you're getting at as well is that there's a big educational and awareness gap in the industry, especially with maybe the client side of like why some of this stuff really matters in the end.
Exactly.
And I think that there are some stats out there, like projects that are more sustainable, or we're using more technology, they have more predictable outcomes, and it's better for the project overall. So maybe it's a matter of doing another data consolidation for that. All right, so in the interest of time, we'll move on to the last couple of questions here. So there's an interesting thought. So the comment that we have is categorizing the data related to construction project types is essential. I believe the word construction and climate are very generic, which I think I would tend to agree with. Like, what does it actually mean? There's so many different complexities to construction. What are we building? A lot of different complexities to climate. What is it that we're experiencing? So any other thoughts on that from our panelists?
I think that's actually a very, very interesting comment. And that's also why in our platform, we try to integrate all of the key activities in construction that are really relevant to the person that's actually using the platform, so they can change the thresholds according to the things that are most relevant to them. And we also list like all of the key different weather risks. Yeah, like when you're like a construction project is so complex that you cannot simply talk about like climate in general or construction in general. It will always be like a very specific use case, but it's by taking all these use cases that you can actually develop a tool that would be useful to all in all different regions of the world, addressing and facing different problems.
Yeah, and Julieta, go ahead. I was going to ask
Alexandra about how can it be useful for everyone, right? And so I think with all technologies, it's super important to have the customer discovery hat on, kind of the empathy towards these people that already work more than 40 hours a week. They're all just trying to fix whatever problem is happening tomorrow on site. Or as designers, just constant change orders that are happening. And then you overlay on top of all the different change orders that are happening because of human perspective and construction difficulties with climate. I think something to really think about is the empathy towards those people and how can you make this as simple as possible to adopt, meaning it should be overlaid to whatever existing platforms they're using. So again, if they're using AutoCAD for 2D because they're in the Stone Ages, or they're using 3D models, it's an overlaid model to their existing platforms. It's a plugin that's already easy. Autodesk has amazing integration programs to make that easy for startups and for users. So I think it's always going back to how can we make this almost like a non-negotiable to use. It's the adoption is so easy, and it's just another layer that you're adding on where you're able to already see how it interacts. So my vision for this is if we're already working, let's say, in a topographic map, and I'm thinking again about the ocean right now, right? So we're already working with that, and we have this static map of whatever we put in for topography. Can we overlay on that topography all the different layers of climate that are dynamic as well? But it already goes into the platform, and it's living in the clouds. It's not taking a bunch of data into your models where then it's slower and things like that, just really on the user perspective, how can we make this so simple that they can't say no, pretty much?
That's a very, very interesting
Yeah.
point, actually, because we now work with all of the major QSRA softwares out there. So Acumen, Oracle, Safran, Nodes and Links. And it's really, really important for us to embed with all those risk modeling providers to actually, as you mentioned, make it more easy for people to use with their current softwares.
That's amazing.
Amazing. So I do want to pick on you, Julieta, one more time. So I know you recently attended New York City Climate Week. Would you mind sharing maybe a little bit of your experience from there and any insights?
Yeah, I was just sharing with the panelists before this call what's been so exciting. It's my first time attending Climate Week in New York. But apparently this is not a hard stat, so don't quote me on this, but apparently there have been 5 times more attendees this year than ever before. And the reason is so simple. People care about it now. Like climate is now a topic that everyone's talking about. And when I'm saying people care about it, there's investors coming into the room and putting money where their mouth is. And I think that's so exciting. It's a huge opportunity for founders to be entering the space. And I really encourage founders from different industries to enter the construction space, because we need to have knowledge coming in from other industries that have worked on these problems before into the built environment. And another anecdote that I'll share is a lot of the conversation that I heard at different events was around the adoption piece. People saying, okay, I'm ready, I'm bought in, I believe in this, I'm interested, how do I adopt this? What technology do I use and how do I adopt it? And there are amazing like marketplace solutions to see what technologies exist. So for example, in Switzerland, the Solar Impulse Foundation, they have an entire kind of solutions page which showcases all the top solutions for the built environment that are the most sustainable, whether it's software, materials, hardware, and they've already been pre-vetted by a group of experts in that field. But we need more of that. We need to have more of the piece of not just what technology exists out there, how do we actually adopt it into our practices? And that's really what I'm focused on at Overlay Capital, which is how can we make sure that, you know, these builders or contractors, you know, designers, owners, they're interested, but they have no idea how to implement it into their process. And how can they make it the most simple and cheap and fast way possible to lower their carbon? And so I think it's going to take a collective effect of all of us sharing case studies of how it's worked and building a playbook around how it's worked for you and your company to adopt these technologies and lessons learned, because we don't really have time to waste. We have to do this yesterday. And so I think just coming out of Climate Week, it was just very encouraging. I think most times that I'm in meetings or, you know, panels or webinars like this where we talk about climate change, it's very depressing and scary. But I think there was kind of this inflection point this year where now it's kind of people are coming at it with energy and ideas and optimism.
Amazing. So well said. There is no time to waste. So thank you for sharing that, Julieta. So the very last question that we have in the chat, so what technology or tools can we use to currently reduce these risks? I'll of course point to EHAB, which Josh, who's with the EHAB team, has also dropped a link into the chat as well. But I'll also say feel free to reach out to me as well. There are a couple other solutions like specifically focused on tracking carbon, for example, that could be helpful. So I'm happy to connect with anybody offline if you want to chat about more context solutions. But definitely check out EHAB. And with that, we are just about at time. So give me one moment to share my screen here. Let me know when the thank you page comes up.
Yeah.
All right. So yes. So thank you to all of our presenters. So Alexandra, Joao, Julieta, and especially EHAB for being willing to present, put this webinar on, and basically have a really good conversation about climate and risk and weather in construction and how we can basically come together as a team and use technology to empower us to, like you said, Julia, to get started on this yesterday. And have better outcomes on our project. So thank you, everybody. And then for anybody who's interested as well, I've put Alexandra's contact information up here on the page. I believe Josh with the EHAB team has also dropped the website link into the chat. but I'll pause here. So feel free to reach out to Alexandra if you have any questions about their solution and want to take a look at how they're essentially providing you data to essentially predict and control and mitigate risk with your projects. So thank you. With that, I think there is one more comment in the chat. Yes, all right, awesome. So thank you, everybody. And that's all that we have for today.